Top 1 Göbekli Tepe. The year is 9600 BCE. You are standing on a barren hilltop in southeastern Turkey, and you are doing something that should not be possible. You are carving multi-ton limestone pillars into T-shapes 20 feet tall, arranging them in precise circles, and decorating them with reliefs of scorpions, foxes, and vultures. The problem? Agriculture does not exist yet. Cities do not exist. According to everything we know about human development, you are supposed to be a nomadic hunter-gatherer, scratching survival from the landscape. Instead, you are building a temple complex that will take 300 years to complete, and when you are finished, you are going to bury it on purpose and walk away forever. This is Göbekli Tepe, and it breaks every rule we thought we knew about the birth of civilization. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavations in 1995 after noticing limestone fragments locals had been removing for decades. Ground-penetrating radar revealed at least 20 stone circles buried beneath the surface. By 2008, only 5% had been excavated. What they found rewrote the textbooks. Radiocarbon dating places construction at 9600 to 8200 BCE, making it 11600 years old. That is 6,000 years before Stonehenge and 7,000 years before the pyramids. The largest pillars weigh 16 tons and stand 18 feet tall, quarried and moved without metal tools or wheels. Schmidt's 2006 survey identified carved animal reliefs representing at least 40 different species rendered with stunning artistic skill. The site covers 22 acres, and geomagnetic surveys detect 200 more buried pillars still underground waiting to tell their stories. The precision is what makes historians uncomfortable. Multiple enclosures are aligned to specific stars, Sirius, Deneb, Vega, according to research by Giulio Mali published in 2013. This was not casual stargazing. This was sophisticated astronomical knowledge being permanently encoded in stone. Yet when archaeologists searched for evidence of habitation, they found nothing. No cooking fires, no trash middens, no domestic structures. This was not a settlement, it was purely ceremonial. A pilgrimage site built by people who supposedly did not have the social organization to create pilgrimage sites. Then comes the strangest part. Around 8000 BCE, the entire complex was deliberately filled in with limestone, rubble, and soil. Not abandoned and left to decay, but methodically buried stone by stone, preserving it perfectly beneath the earth. The standard archaeological explanation is straightforward. Hunter-gatherers occasionally gathered for ceremonial purposes, and construction was sporadic, taking place during seasonal assemblies. Once agricultural societies developed elsewhere, the site lost religious significance and was abandoned, naturally filling in over millennia. It is a slow, gradual process that fits our understanding of cultural evolution. But that does not explain the deliberate burial. Natural abandonment creates layers of windblown dust, collapsed roofs, and gradual decay. Göbekli Tepe was filled in while it was still in use, carefully protected from the elements. Someone made a decision to erase it from the landscape at the height of its ceremonial importance. That is not abandonment. That is preservation or concealment. Some researchers ask harder questions. What if this was not the beginning of civilization, but the end of something? What if the builders possessed knowledge being lost, not gained? The astronomical alignment suggests they were tracking celestial events with precision we do not associate with Stone Age cultures. The burial suggests they knew something was ending, that they were protecting knowledge for a future that might understand it. Who organized 500 people to move 16-ton stones without agriculture to feed them? Why bury a functioning temple at the height of its use? What catastrophe or shift made them walk away? We may never know, but the pillars stand as silent witnesses to a chapter of human history we have only begun to read. Top 2. The Indus Valley Civilization. From the buried temples of Turkey, we leap forward 7,000 years and east across mountains to a river valley where 5 million people lived in cities that make modern urban planning look primitive. Imagine a civilization spanning 386,000 square miles, larger than Western Europe, with 5 million inhabitants living in cities laid out on perfect grids. Every house has indoor plumbing. The streets have covered drainage systems. Weights and measures are standardized across 1,000 miles. Now imagine all of it, Every city, every person, vanishing within a century, leaving behind a written language no one can read and almost no evidence of how they disappeared. This is the Indus Valley Civilization, and it is one of the most sophisticated Bronze Age cultures ever discovered. British archaeologist John Marshall announced the discovery in 1924 after excavations at Harappa, and Mohenjo-Daro revealed urban centers that rivaled anything in ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. Over 1,400 settlements have since been identified, spreading from the Arabian Sea to the foothills of the Himalayas. Mohenjo-Daro alone housed 40,000 people in multi-story brick buildings with sophisticated sanitation systems. Excavations led by Mortimer Wheeler in the 1940s revealed a level of urban planning unmatched in the ancient world. The metallurgy was advanced. Bronze tools, copper fishing hooks, standardized weights, and precise ratios of 0.05, 0.1, 0.2, 0.5, 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, 200, and 500. These were not random measurements. This was a civilization-wide system of standardization that required central authority and widespread compliance. Water management reached an art form at Dolavira. Excavations by R.S. Bisht in the 1990s uncovered 7 massive reservoirs with a combined capacity of 36,000 cubic meters in one of the driest regions of the subcontinent. They were not just surviving in arid conditions. They were thriving, supporting dense urban populations through engineering genius. Yet for all this advancement, the Indus Valley Civilization lacks something every other Bronze Age empire possessed: monuments to power. No palaces, no temples, no statues of kings, no military fortifications. The architecture suggests an egalitarian society unique among ancient civilizations. And when they wrote, they left us over 4,000 unique symbols found on seals, tablets, and pottery, a complete written language that has resisted every decipherment attempt for 140 years. The civilization declined between 1900 and 1300 BCE. Cities were gradually abandoned. But here is what is strange. There are no mass graves, no destruction layers, no evidence of conquest or epidemic. The people simply left. Climate studies by Liviu Gheosan and colleagues published in 2012 show monsoon patterns shifted dramatically around 2200 BCE, potentially drying the Gagar-Hakra river system that fed many settlements. Mainstream archaeology sees this as environmental migration. Climate change made the region uninhabitable, forcing gradual dispersal eastward toward the Ganges Valley. The civilization did not collapse. It dispersed and integrated into later Indian cultures. The lack of warfare evidence supports peaceful decline. It is logical, evidence-based, and fits the archaeological record, but it does not explain the writing. Over 4,000 examples of a complete written language, and we cannot decipher a single word. Egyptian hieroglyphics were cracked using the Rosetta Stone. Sumerian cuneiform yielded to linguistic analysis. Mayan glyphs were finally decoded in the late 20th century. But Indus script remains silent. Some linguists suggest it is not actually writing, just symbolic notation. Others argue we simply have not found the right key yet. What if the silence is deliberate? Some researchers note the abrupt cessation of standardized practices, weights, urban planning, script use, all stopping within decades across the entire region. That does not suggest gradual decline. It suggests coordinated withdrawal. Where did 5 million people go with almost no archaeological trace? What happened to the accumulated knowledge of urban planning, metallurgy, and hydraulic engineering? Why has Indus script resisted every decipherment attempt when other ancient languages yielded their secrets? The cities stand empty, their drains still functional, their streets still straight, their writing still silent. Top 3. Cahokia. From the silent cities of the Indus, we cross time and ocean to a place where silence is even stranger. A metropolis in the heart of North America that once rivaled medieval London, now buried beneath cornfields in Illinois. The year is 1250. London has 60,000 people. Paris has 100,000. But step on to the east bank of the Mississippi River in what is now Illinois, and you will find something bigger. A sprawling metropolis of 120 earthen pyramids, 40,000 inhabitants, and a central plaza the size of 35 football fields. This is Cahokia, the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico, and 70 years from now, it will be gone. Not conquered, not burned, just empty. European settlers found massive earthen mounds in the 1700s, but attributed them to an extinct race of mound builders, anyone except the Native Americans they were displacing. Systematic archaeology did not begin until the 1960s under Melvin Fowler. Only in 1982 did radiocarbon dating prove the city's medieval date, forcing a complete reassessment of North American history. At its center rises Monk's Mound, 100 feet tall with a base covering 14 acres. It contains 22 million cubic feet of earth, moved basket by basket, handful by handful, by people with no pack animals or wheeled carts. Population surveys of residential mounds conducted by Timothy Pockettad in 2009 estimated 40,000 people at peak, the same as London in 1250 CE. This was not a village. This was a major urban center with all the complexity that implies: social stratification, organized labor, long-distance trade, and political authority. They even built an astronomical calendar, Woodhenge, a circle of 48 red cedar posts that mark solstices and equinoxes with precision. It was rebuilt 5 times over the city's lifespan, suggesting astronomical observation was central to Cahokian life. The sophistication rivals anything in medieval Europe, but darkness lurks beneath the grandeur. Excavations at Mound 72 uncovered 222 bodies, including 53 young women buried simultaneously in a single pit. The arrangement suggests human sacrifice on a massive scale. Trade networks span from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, with marine shells, copper, and mica, all found at the site, evidence of a vast economic web centered on this Mississippi River metropolis. Then came the collapse. Tree ring data from studies by Neil Lopino in 1997 showed a deforestation crisis, with 20,000 trees cut annually for construction and defensive palisades. The city consumed its resources faster than they could regenerate. Between 1300 and 1350 CE, Cahokia was abandoned. No evidence of conquest, no signs of disease or natural disaster, just gradual emptying until the greatest city in North America stood silent. The mainstream explanation focuses on environmental degradation, deforestation, overpopulation, and soil depletion, compounded by flooding and climate cooling during the Little Ice Age onset. The ruling elite lost legitimacy when they could not maintain social order or food supplies. People dispersed to smaller settlements. The Mississippian culture continued elsewhere, but never rebuilt Cahokia. It is a classic case of unsustainable growth leading to societal collapse. But gradual dispersal does not explain the totality of the abandonment. Monk's Mound could hold 5,000 people for ceremonies. The city had been rebuilt multiple times over 3 centuries, recovering from floods and fires. Why did they not rebuild this time? And here is the deeper mystery. This was the most valuable real estate in North America. Rich soil, access to major rivers, strategic location. Yet no one ever returned to reclaim it. Dendrochronology shows catastrophic Mississippi River flooding in the early 1300s. But some archaeologists note that new mounds were being built even as the site was abandoned. Construction projects were left unfinished, labor invested then suddenly halted. What if they did not leave because the city failed, but because something else required abandoning it? Why abandon the most agriculturally rich, strategically located city on the continent? What happened to 40,000 people with no archaeological trace of mass migration? Why did Mississippian culture never attempt to rebuild their greatest achievement? The mounds remain, silent monuments to a civilization that erased itself from history. Top 4. Tiwanaku. From earthen pyramids built by hand, we travel to stone cities carved at altitudes where most people can barely breathe. A people who achieved engineering precision that defies explanation, then vanished before the Inca ever arrived. The air is thin at 12,500 feet above sea level. Your lungs burn with every breath. Your head pounds from altitude sickness. Yet you are watching workers quarry 50-ton andesite blocks, transport them 10 miles across mountains, and fit them together so precisely that a knife blade cannot slip between them. This is Tiwanaku, a civilization building monumental architecture at an elevation where oxygen deprivation makes physical labor nearly impossible. At its peak, 20,000 people lived here, in the largest high-altitude city in human history. Then around 1000 CE, they vanished. Spanish conquistador Pedro Chiesa de Leon first described the site in 1549, reporting local legends that claimed it was built by giants before the Inca. Even then, 400 years after its abandonment, the ruins were so massive that native peoples could not imagine human construction. Scientific archaeology began with Max Uhle in 1893, but it was Arthur Posnansky's controversial work in the 1910s through 1940s that brought Tiwanaku into public consciousness, though his claims of 15,000-year-old origins were quickly dismissed. Modern dating is more conservative but no less impressive. The civilization flourished from 300 to 1000 CE, building monuments that still confound engineers. The largest stone block at the nearby Pumapunku site weighs 131 metric tons and was moved 10 kilometers from its quarry without wheels or draft animals at 12,000 feet elevation, where every step is exhausting. The precision cutting is what separates Tiwanaku from other ancient sites. H blocks with complex interlocking joints show tolerances of 150th of an inch, according to research by Jean-Pierre Pratzen and Stella Nair, published in 2013. These are not rough-hewn stones. They are precision-engineered components that fit together like a three-dimensional puzzle. Modern stonemasons struggle to replicate this accuracy at sea level with power tools. The Akapana Pyramid stands 700 feet wide at the base, originally 56 feet tall, containing 2.6 million cubic feet of stone and earth. It was not just big, it was astronomically aligned, sophisticated in drainage, and structurally complex. But the real engineering marvel was agricultural. Advanced terraces called suka colas covered 190 square kilometers, using water's thermal mass to prevent frost damage in the frigid highland climate. This was not subsistence farming, this was industrial-scale agriculture, feeding hundreds of thousands. The semi-subterranean temple features 175 stone faces, representing different ethnic groups, evidence of a multi-ethnic empire. Population estimates range wildly from 365,000 to 1.5 million across the empire, depending on the researcher. What is certain is that Tiwanaku was a major political and economic power in the Andes for 700 years. Collapse came around 1000 CE, coinciding with severe drought. Ice core data from Lonnie Thompson and colleagues published in 1998 shows a 300-year dry period beginning around 950 CE. Lake Titicaca levels dropped dramatically, destroying the raised field agricultural system that fed the empire. Mainstream archaeology presents this as straightforward environmental collapse. Climate change made the region uninhabitable. Unable to sustain the population, the civilization fragmented into smaller settlements in the lowlands. The Inca later incorporated survivors into their empire, absorbing what remained of Tiwanaku culture. It is logical and supported by climate data. But the drought theory does not explain how engineering knowledge simply vanished. The Spanish found the ruins being used as a quarry by local people who had no memory of how the original stones were cut or moved. In just a few centuries, descendants of this civilization forgot their greatest achievements. How does that happen? Recent studies by John Janasek, published in 2008, suggest political upheaval and elite competition destabilized the empire before drought delivered the final blow. Evidence of rapid abandonment appears at some sites, unfinished monuments and tools left in place at Pumapunku, as if workers simply stopped mid-project and walked away. That does not fit gradual environmental decline. That suggests crisis. How did they achieve precision stone cutting that modern stonemasons struggle to replicate, especially at oxygen-starved altitudes? Where did the engineering knowledge go? And why could descendants not replicate even simplified versions? What caused the apparent sudden abandonment of unfinished construction projects? The stones know, but they are not talking. Top 5. The Minoans. From the Andean heights, we descend to the Mediterranean, to an island where Europe's first literate civilization built palaces of unmatched sophistication, then vanished in fire and catastrophe. The year is 1700 BCE. You are walking through the palace at Knossos on the island of Crete. The walls are covered in vibrant frescoes of dolphins, octopi, and bull leapers frozen in impossible acrobatic leaps. Multi-story buildings with advanced plumbing surround you. Running water flows through terracotta pipes. Ventilation systems channel cool air through the corridors. This is the Minoan civilization, Europe's first literate culture, a Bronze Age society more sophisticated than anything the mainland Greeks have ever seen. In 200 years, most of it will be buried under volcanic ash and tsunami debris. The survivors will never recover. British archaeologist Arthur Evans began excavating Knossos in 1900, uncovering 1,300 rooms spread across 150,000 square feet. He coined the term Minoan after the legendary King Minos, and what he found revolutionized our understanding of European prehistory. This was not primitive. This was palatial culture with indoor plumbing, flush toilets, and ventilation systems not matched in Europe until the Roman Empire 1,000 years later. The Minoans developed writing. Linear A script appears on over 1,500 clay tablets, carefully preserved in palace archives. It is clearly a complete writing system with consistent grammar and syntax. Yet despite 120 years of intensive study by the world's best linguists, we cannot read a single word. The script remains one of archaeology's most frustrating mysteries. At its height, the Minoan thalassocracy, their sea empire, controlled trade routes from Egypt to Sicily. Minoan pottery has been found across the entire Mediterranean, evidence of far-reaching commercial networks. They were wealthy, powerful, and culturally dominant, influencing art and architecture throughout the Aegean world. Then came the eruption. The island of Santorini, ancient Thera, sits 70 miles north of Crete. Around 1628 BCE, based on ice core dating, it exploded with force 100 times greater than Mount St. Helens. Ash fell across Crete, darkening the skies. But worse was the tsunami. Deposits found 40 kilometers inland on northern Crete by John Bruins, and colleagues in 2008 suggest waves over 40 feet high, slamming into coastal settlements. Entire port cities would have been obliterated in minutes. Yet here is the timeline problem. Radiocarbon dating and ice cores point to 1618 BCE for the eruption, but Knossos and other palaces show major destruction around 1450 BCE, 200 years later. The palace fires do not contain volcanic ash. They show signs of deliberate destruction. Walls torn down, precious objects smashed. Something else happened, something that had nothing to do with volcanoes. Around 1450 BCE, Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland took control of Crete. They spoke early Greek and used Linear B script, which we successfully deciphered in 1952. Linear B tablets found at Knossos show Greek administration of a formerly Minoan palace. The takeover was complete. Within a few generations, Minoan culture was absorbed, transformed, and ultimately lost. Then came the broader Bronze Age collapse around 1100 BCE, when civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean fell within decades. The Mycenaeans themselves disappeared. The palace system collapsed. Writing was lost for 400 years. Europe descended into a dark age. Mainstream archaeology sees natural disaster followed by opportunistic conquest. The Thera eruption weakened Minoan civilization through ashfall, tsunamis, and climate disruption. Mycenaean Greeks invaded during this period of vulnerability, taking control of a weakened culture. Later, the Bronze Age collapse destroyed both civilizations as part of a broader systems failure affecting the entire region. It is sequential, logical, and evidence-based, but the timeline creates problems. 200 years passed between the eruption and the palace destructions. That is 8 generations. If the eruption was the cause, why the delay? And while we deciphered Mycenaean Linear B within 50 years of focused study, we still cannot read Minoan Linear A, despite having 1,500 examples and knowing their related scripts. The languages share symbols and the structure is similar, yet one speaks and one remains silent. What if the Minoans deliberately encoded their knowledge in ways meant to remain secret? Some scholars suggest the eruption was merely coincidence, that Minoan collapse stemmed from internal political upheaval. Recent archaeological work by Jan Driessen, published in 2019, suggests civil conflict occurred before any natural disaster, that palaces may have been deliberately burned during internal power struggles. Why can we not decipher Linear A when we successfully decoded related Linear B? Did the Minoans have advance warning of the eruption based on seismic activity? Where did the Minoan population go? And why is there no clear archaeological continuation? Europe's first civilization was erased so thoroughly that even its writing refuses to speak. Top 6. Ancestral Pueblones. From Mediterranean palaces to American cliff dwellings, we cross an ocean to a people who built cities in the most unlikely places imaginable, vertical sandstone walls, then climbed down and never returned. You are standing at the bottom of a sandstone canyon in southwestern Colorado, neck craned upward, looking at Cliff Palace. It rises 700 feet above you, tucked into a massive cave alcove in the canyon wall. 200 rooms, 23 circular kivas for ceremonies, and stone masonry walls 3 stories high. Wooden ladders and hand-carved toe holds provide the only access. Somehow, people carried every stone, every timber, and every drop of water up there and built a thriving community that housed over 100 people. For 3 centuries, they lived in these impossible cliff dwellings, developed sophisticated astronomical knowledge, and created intricate pottery and basketry. Then, in the late 1300s, they climbed down, walked away, and never came back. Cowboys Richard Wetherill and Charlie Mason discovered Cliff Palace in 1888 while tracking cattle through Mesa Verde. What they found seemed impossible. Entire cities built into vertical cliff faces, accessible only by rope and ladder, abandoned but perfectly preserved by the dry desert air. Their discovery launched southwestern archaeology as a discipline. The breakthrough came in the 1920s when A. E. Douglas pioneered dendrochronology, tree ring dating, using timber from these exact sites. For the first time, archaeologists could date ancient construction to the exact year. Cliff Palace was built between 1190 and 1260 CE, stone by stone, room by room, at the peak of what we now call the ancestral Puebloan civilization. But Cliff Palace was just one city in a vast network. Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon, 150 miles south, contained over 650 rooms rising 5 stories tall. Its walls were precisely aligned to solar and lunar cycles, tracking celestial movements with architectural astronomy. At Fajada Butte, Anna Sophia discovered the sun dagger in 1977, a spiral petroglyph that perfectly marks solstices and equinoxes through carefully positioned light shafts. This was not accidental. This was encoded astronomical knowledge. They built roads, 400 miles of straight, 30-foot wide roads connecting communities across the Four Corners region. The roads are so straight and uniform, they are only fully visible from the air, suggesting planning on a regional scale. Population estimates for the greater Chaco region range from 5,000 to 20,000 at peak, according to Lynn Sebastian's research in 1992. Then came abandonment. Between 1275 and 1300 CE, the entire Four Corners region was evacuated. Tree rings record a 24-year drought, one of the worst in the region's history. But here is what is puzzling. Many earlier droughts occurred without abandonment. Some were even worse. Yet this one triggered complete regional evacuation. Mainstream archaeology presents this as environmental migration. Prolonged drought combined with soil degradation and deforestation made the region uninhabitable. The population migrated south to the Rio Grande Valley and west to modern Hopi lands in Arizona. This was adaptation, not collapse. Modern Puebloan peoples, the Hopi, Zuni, and Rio Grande Pueblo, claim direct descent and have oral traditions describing migrations rather than disaster. It is a survival story, not a tragedy. But migration does not explain the totality of the abandonment. They left behind irreplaceable astronomical knowledge encoded in stone. The Sun Dagger site tracks the 18.6-year lunar cycle, a sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics requiring generations of observation. Why abandon centuries of accumulated knowledge? And if drought was the cause, why did they not return when rains resumed after 1300 CE? Recent studies by Timothy Kohler and colleagues published in 2014 paint a darker picture. Evidence of violence and social upheaval precedes the drought. Kiva murals show warriors in conflict. Some skeletal remains bear marks of violence. The controversial evidence of cannibalism at some sites documented by Christie and Jacqueline Turner in 1999 suggests social breakdown and ritualized violence. Though this interpretation remains hotly debated, some archaeologists propose the cliff dwellings themselves were defensive. Cities built in inaccessible locations out of fear rather than choice. Daily life would have been incredibly difficult. Every drop of water, every basket of corn, and every piece of firewood had to be carried up rope ladders. That is not convenience. That is security. What were they afraid of? Why build cities in nearly inaccessible cliff alcoves requiring dangerous daily climbs? What caused the synchronized regional abandonment when similar droughts had occurred before without evacuation? Why did they not return when climate conditions improved after 1300 CE? The cliff dwellings stand empty, their astronomical alignments still marking the sun's passage, their builders long gone. Top 7. The Aksumite Empire. From cliff cities to towering obelisks, we travel to Africa to an empire that once challenged Rome itself, then disappeared so completely from historical consciousness that medieval Europe forgot it ever existed. The year is 400 CE. You are standing in the capital of an African empire that controls trade routes stretching from the Roman Empire to India. Granite obelisks tower above you, 100-foot monoliths carved from single stones and erected with engineering precision rivaling anything in Egypt. Coins minted with royal portraits circulate from Jerusalem to Ceylon. This is Aksum, one of the four great powers of the ancient world alongside Rome, Persia, and China. The Persian prophet Mani named it so, ranking Aksum with the greatest empires of the age. In 500 years, the world will forget it existed. German archaeologist Enno Littmann conducted the first systematic study in 1906, revealing the scale of Aksumite architecture. Extensive excavations in the 1960s under Ethiopian and international teams uncovered palaces, monuments, and industrial complexes showing sophisticated urban planning. UNESCO designated it a World Heritage Site in 1980, bringing renewed attention to Africa's forgotten superpower. The numbers are staggering. The Great Obelisk of Aksum stood 97 feet tall, weighing 517 tons, carved from a single block of granite. It fell during erection, shattering, a monument to ambition that exceeded capability. But others succeeded. The largest still standing rises 79 feet, 160 tons of precisely carved stone balanced on end. How they quarried, transported, and erected these monoliths remains debated, but the achievement is undeniable. Aksum was the first sub-Saharan African kingdom to mint its own coins. Gold, silver, and bronze coins bearing royal portraits have been found from India to Israel, physical evidence of far-reaching trade networks. The Byzantine writer Cosmas Indicopleustes, writing in 525 CE, described Aksumite control of Red Sea trade routes, calling their naval power a thalassocracy, a sea empire. King Azana converted to Christianity around 330 CE, making Aksum one of the first Christian kingdoms, predating most of Europe's conversion by centuries. This was not peripheral Christianity. This was a major power adopting the faith when it was still spreading through the Roman Empire, giving the religion political and military might in Africa. The palaces matched the monuments in scale. Excavations at Dungar between 1999 and 2009 revealed a 50-room palace with sophisticated water systems, reception halls, and domestic quarters suitable for royalty. This was urban sophistication on par with anything in the Mediterranean world. Decline began around 630 CE with the rise of Islam. Islamic expansion cut off Mediterranean trade routes that had been Aksum's economic lifeline. Revenue dried up as Red Sea commerce fell under Muslim control. Environmental studies compound the picture. Pollen cores analyzed by Ian Derbyshire and colleagues in 2003 showed deforestation and soil erosion accelerating between 600 and 900 CE. The agricultural base was collapsing even as trade routes closed. By 940 CE, Aksum was abandoned as a capital. Power shifted southward, but the empire fragmented. Ethiopian kingdoms continued but never regained international prominence or matched Aksumite architectural achievements. Mainstream history presents economic and environmental collapse. Islamic expansion severed trade monopolies. Deforestation and soil depletion reduced agricultural capacity. The combination was fatal. The empire fragmented into smaller kingdoms that survived but lost the centralized power and resources needed for monumental construction. Ethiopian culture continued, but Aksumite grandeur was never recovered. But that does not explain the historical amnesia. Aksumite coins have been found across 3 continents. Hard physical evidence of their reach. Byzantine sources describe them as diplomatic and commercial equals. They were a Christian kingdom in regular contact with Rome and Constantinople. Yet by the Middle Ages, Europe had completely forgotten this African empire existed. Medieval maps show blank spaces where Axum once ruled. Chronicles make no mention. The historical record went silent. How does a world power disappear from global memory? Some historians argue deliberate erasure. As Islam came to dominate historical chronicles and Europe descended into medieval isolation, records of Christian Africa were lost, ignored, or deliberately suppressed. The narrative of African inferiority required forgetting empires like Axum. What contradicted the story was removed from it. Recent archaeology keeps proving Axum was far more advanced than previously believed. Each excavation reveals greater sophistication, wider trade networks, and more impressive engineering. We are rediscovering a civilization that was deliberately forgotten. How did they quarry, transport, and erect 500-ton obelisks without metal tools, wheels, or modern mathematics? Why did Aksumite engineering knowledge vanish so completely that no later Ethiopian kingdom replicated the monuments? Why was such a major empire forgotten by global history for over 1,000 years? The obelisks stand as silent accusations of historical amnesia, monuments to power that the world chose not to remember. Top 8. Norte Chico. From African obelisks to Peruvian pyramids, we cross the Atlantic to the oldest civilization in the Americas. A people who built cities without pottery, armies without weapons, and somehow thrived without war. The year is 3000 BCE. In Egypt, laborers are raising the first true pyramids. In Mesopotamia, scribes are perfecting cuneiform writing. Half a world away in Peru's Supa Valley, you are standing in a city of 3,000 people. But something is missing. There is no pottery for cooking or storage, no weapons of any kind, no defensive walls protecting the settlement, no art depicting warfare or violence. For over 1,000 years, the Norte Chico civilization built monumental pyramids and thrived in one of the driest deserts on Earth. And they did it all without the tools every other ancient civilization considered essential. Peruvian archaeologist Ruth Shady began excavating the site of Corral in 1994. What she found seemed impossible. When radiocarbon dates came back in 2001, the archaeological community was shocked. 3000 BCE, that made Corral contemporary with Egyptian pyramids and 1,500 years older than any other civilization in the Americas. The implications were staggering. Everything we thought we knew about New World development was wrong. Corral's main pyramid covers 4 hectares at the base, rising 60 feet into the desert sky. Construction required moving 16,000 cubic meters of stone and earth. According to Shady's 2001 publication, the labor organization alone indicates complex society. But Corral was just one city in a network. 25 Norte Chico urban centers have been identified, the largest housing over 3,000 people. The radiocarbon dates are precise. Reed-woven bags used in construction tested to 2627 BCE plus or minus 35 years. The bags themselves became the time capsules preserved in Peru's arid climate for nearly 5,000 years. This was not gradual village growth. This was urban planning from the start. Here is what makes Norte Chico unique. Zero pottery, not primitive pottery, not crude ceramics, nothing. For over 1,000 years of urban living, they created no pottery whatsoever. In archaeological terms, that is unheard of. Pottery is considered essential to settled life, necessary for food storage, cooking, and water transport. Yet Norte Chico thrived without it. No weapons either. Jonathan Haas and Winifred Creamer published findings in 2006 documenting the complete absence of weapons, defensive fortifications, or art depicting warfare across all Norte Chico sites. No spear points, no clubs, no defensive walls, no battlements, no images of combat or conquest. A civilization built on something other than violence. Their economy was ingenious. Advanced irrigation systems channeled seasonal rivers to support cotton and squash cultivation, but the real wealth came from the sea. Massive quantities of anchovy remains suggest a maritime economy. Coastal communities fished. Inland communities grew cotton for nets. The exchange created interdependence, trade networks that required cooperation rather than conquest. Some researchers propose this is where the Quipu system originated, knotted strings for recording transactions, predating the Inca use by 4,000 years. Abandonment came around 1800 BCE, coinciding with a climate shift. El Niño patterns intensified, disrupting both ocean currents and river flows. The fishing-agriculture balance collapsed. Without pottery for storage and no military force for conquest, Norte Chico could not adapt. Mainstream archaeology explains Norte Chico as a unique adaptation. A maritime economy plus cotton cultivation created social complexity without warfare. When climate changed and El Niño strengthened, the specialized economy could not withstand the disruption. Population dispersed, sites were abandoned, and the civilization ended. It is environmental determinism, simple cause and effect. But it does not explain the pottery absence. Every other early civilization, without exception, developed pottery for storage and cooking. Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, Mesoamerica, all had ceramics early in their development. Norte Chico had none for over 1,000 years of urban living. Their diet must have been radically different, based on fish and foods requiring minimal cooking. But that level of cultural commitment to a no-pottery lifestyle is unprecedented, and the peaceful nature remains puzzling. Competition for resources typically drives state formation. Warfare creates social hierarchy. Conquest builds empires. That is the pattern everywhere else in the ancient world. Norte Chico built monumental architecture and complex society through cooperation. Did they discover an alternative path to civilization, one based on mutual benefit rather than domination? How did a complex society function for over 1,000 years without pottery for storage and cooking? Why is there absolutely no evidence of warfare in a civilization capable of organizing labor for monumental construction? Where did the Norte Chico people go? And why is there no clear archaeological succession in the region? We may never know, but the pyramids remain monuments to a civilization that chose a different path. Top 9. The Khmer Empire. From the oldest civilization in the Americas to one of its last great pre-Columbian counterparts, we journey to Southeast Asia, where a hydraulic megacity ruled half a peninsula, then drowned in its own success. The year is 1200 CE. You are standing in the largest pre-industrial city on Earth. Angkor sprawls across 400 square miles, home to 1 million people. That is larger than any European city of the era, bigger than London, Paris, or Rome at their medieval peaks. Massive stone temples tower above you. Angkor Wat rises 213 feet with 5 towers representing Mount Meru, home of the gods. Sophisticated canals, reservoirs, and irrigation systems manage water across hundreds of square miles, engineering that would make modern hydraulic engineers envious. This is the height of the Khmer Empire, controlling much of Southeast Asia through military might and cultural dominance. Within 200 years, the jungle will swallow it whole. French naturalist Henri Mouhot published accounts in 1860 describing his rediscovery of Angkor Wat. Though local Khmer people never lost knowledge of its location, his romantic descriptions of jungle-covered ruins captured European imagination. Aerial photography in the 1930s revealed massive hydraulic infrastructure invisible from ground level. But the real revolution came in 2015 when LiDAR scanning technology penetrated the jungle canopy to reveal the true scope of the city. Angkor Wat Temple alone covers 42 acres, requiring 5 to 10 million sandstone blocks, each cut, transported, and precisely placed. It is the largest religious monument in the world, dedicated first to Vishnu, later converted to Buddhism. But Angkor Wat was just the ceremonial heart. The LiDAR survey conducted by Damian Evans and colleagues revealed a city covering 1,150 square miles, larger than modern Los Angeles. The hydraulic network was the empire's lifeline. The West Barai Reservoir covered 74 square kilometers, storing water for dry season irrigation. 200 kilometers of canals distributed water across the urban area, according to research by Roland Fletcher and colleagues published in 2008. This was not just impressive, this was essential. Cambodia's climate swings between monsoon floods and severe dry seasons. Managing that water meant survival. Population estimates for Angkor at peak between 1150 and 1220 CE range from 750,000 to 1 million, making it Earth's largest city at the time. According to Eileen Lustig and colleagues in 2018, the urban area included temples, palaces, markets, workshops, and vast residential zones, all dependent on the hydraulic system functioning perfectly. Collapse came in 1431 when the Thai Ayutthaya kingdom sacked Angkor, but the city was already dying. Climate proxy data published by Brendan Buckley and colleagues in 2010 shows mega droughts from 1362 to 1392 and 1415 to 1440, unprecedented in severity. Between droughts came extreme monsoon flooding, the worst on record. The hydraulic system could not handle the extremes. Archaeological excavations show hydraulic infrastructure failure. Sediment buildup choked canals. Reservoirs cracked and leaked. The maintenance required to keep the system functioning became impossible during climate chaos. When Thai armies arrived, they conquered a city already in crisis. The capital moved to Phnom Penh in 1434. Within decades, the jungle reclaimed what had been the world's greatest city. Mainstream archaeology presents this as environmental collapse amplified by over-engineering. The Khmer built a hydraulic system so complex it required constant expert maintenance. When megadroughts alternated with catastrophic flooding, small failures cascaded into system-wide collapse. Unable to feed the population, the empire fragmented and relocated. Thai military pressure finished what climate began. It is systems theory applied to archaeology, logical and evidence-based. But the hydraulic engineering was incredibly sophisticated. They managed water for 1 million people across 1,000 square kilometers for over 3 centuries. If climate was the problem, why could they not adapt the very system they had built and maintained for 600 years? The knowledge was there. The labor force existed. Why not rebuild? The collapse was remarkably fast. Within a single generation, the world's largest city became jungle-covered ruins. That is not gradual decline. That is catastrophic systems failure. Recent studies suggest the Khmer became victims of their own success, building complexity beyond their ability to maintain. The hydraulic network grew so interconnected that small failures propagated into total collapse. They had over-engineered themselves into fragility. It is a warning. Advanced civilizations can fail, not despite their sophistication, but because of it. Complexity creates vulnerability. Interdependence means cascading failure. The more sophisticated the system, the more catastrophic the collapse when it comes. Why could the empire that built the system not maintain it during climate stress? How did a 1 million-person city empty so completely that Europeans rediscovered it centuries later, treating it as lost rather than remembered? What happened to the engineering knowledge? And why could descendants not rebuild even simplified versions? The temples stand in the jungle, monuments to ambition that exceeded sustainability, a civilization that drowned in its own complexity. Top 10. The pattern of lost knowledge. 10 civilizations separated by continents and millennia. Each built something that should not have been possible with their supposed technology. The builders of Göbekli Tepe moving 16-ton stones before agriculture existed. The Indus Valley standardizing weights across 1,000 miles without centralized government. Cahokia rivaling medieval London in the Mississippi Valley. The Nabateans turning desert into garden through hydraulic genius. Tiwanaku achieving precision engineering at 12,000 feet where oxygen deprivation makes thought difficult. The Minoans building Europe's first literate culture only to have their writing remain silent for over a century of study. Ancestral Puebloans embedding astronomical knowledge in cliff-face cities, then abandoning it all. Aksum raising 500-ton obelisks, then disappearing from historical memory. Norte Chico thriving for 1,000 years without pottery or warfare. The Khmer managing water for 1 million people through engineering so sophisticated it became their downfall. Each achieved heights we struggle to replicate. Each left evidence we cannot fully explain, and each vanished, often completely, within a few generations. The mainstream narrative tells us these were natural cycles. Climate changed, trade routes shifted, resources depleted, populations migrated. It is all explainable through gradual processes that fit our understanding of societal decline. And much of that is true. Environmental change played undeniable roles. Economic shifts matter. Overpopulation strains resources. These are real factors with real evidence. But look closer at what was lost. Göbekli Tepe was not abandoned. It was buried, deliberately preserved or concealed. The Indus script will not speak after 140 years of dedicated study, while we deciphered related scripts in decades. Cahokia's 40,000 people left no migration trail, no clear successor sites. The Nabateans erased their own ethnic identity so completely that no modern group claims descent. Tiwanaku's engineering knowledge simply vanished, leaving descendants unable to explain or replicate. Minoan linear A remained silent while we decoded linear B. The ancestral Puebloans left astronomical knowledge carved in stone, observatories tracking celestial cycles, then walked away. Aksum was forgotten despite minting coins found on 3 continents, despite diplomatic relations with Rome and Persia, wiped from European memory for 1,000 years. Nordichico achieved civilization without the warfare and pottery every other early society required. Angkor's million inhabitants vanished into the jungle, knowledge of maintaining their hydraulic systems lost. These are not just declines, they are erasures, some deliberate, like Göbekli Tepe's careful burial, some cultural, like identity dissolving into surrounding populations, some historical, like Aksum's removal from European chronicles, some technological, like Tiwanaku's lost precision stone cutting, or Angkor's hydraulic engineering expertise. What they share is this: knowledge disappeared, not slowly through gradual cultural evolution, but completely, utterly, within decades or centuries. Advanced understanding of astronomy, engineering, water management, and social organization, all gone, leaving descendants who could not explain, could not replicate, and could not even remember what their ancestors achieved. The official story says civilizations naturally decline, that societies fade and knowledge diffuses into successor cultures. That is comforting. It suggests continuity, progress, and evolution. But 10 civilizations suggest something else, that knowledge can be lost instantly and utterly, that entire ways of understanding the world can vanish within a generation, that what seems permanent, carved in stone, built to last millennia, can become unknowable almost overnight. Most people walk through museums, look at artifacts from these lost civilizations, and see primitive peoples who simply did not know better. They accept the comfortable narrative that we are the peak, that human progress only goes upward, and that ancient cultures were stepping stones to our modern sophistication. Interesting but inferior. But you are here because you see the glitches. You recognize that Göbekli Tepe's 11,600-year-old astronomical alignments are not primitive guesswork, but sophisticated knowledge. That the Indus Valley's grid cities and plumbing systems represent urban planning more advanced than medieval Europe 2,000 years later. That Cahokia building a city larger than contemporary London challenges every assumption about advanced versus primitive cultures. That Nordichico achieving civilization without warfare proves violence is not necessary for social complexity. If these stories of lost civilizations and buried knowledge have changed the way you look at the history we were taught, please subscribe and like the channel. We are excavating the history they tried to bury. Let's plant the seeds for a better understanding of our past. The next treasure of history will be uncovered soon.